All right, very happy to be welcoming Teresa Letlow onto the podcast today. She's going to share her thoughts on our best practices report on achieving success with modern analytics. Teresa, of course, is the Senior Vice President for the Global Cloud Alliances at Software AG. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining, Teresa. How are you today?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. So I know we're going to have some interesting questions for you on modern analytics, of course, tied to the best practices report. But I think a nice place to start for everyone is if you wouldn't mind maybe sharing a little background about yourself, and then we can jump into the questions here.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I've actually been in the data and analytics space my entire career. So that's over 25 years. I won't go into the specifics on that. But in that time, started out with a small systems integration firm where we were really just talking about what is this thing called data warehousing, right? Really more around what is it and how do you even do anything with combining different types of data and analytics pieces. And then, progressing up through working with the larger companies, HP, Accenture, and really just watching the evolution over time of analytics. I'm absolutely passionate about it, and I've been involved in the space, since its inception. So that's kind of a little bit about my background, both on the systems integration and the product side, both.
Well, that's perfect. I actually was going to ask you, my first question was going to be, how have you seen, the analytics, especially as we talk about modern analytics, how have you seen that change over the last maybe 5 to 10 years? And it sounds like you'll have an answer for me.
Absolutely. So, if we take a trip down memory lane, right? It was in the early days, it was really just there's a database and you've got some analytic tool. Well, actually, we'll call them reporting tools because it was always looking at historical data and then trying to make a decision based on what the historical data would tell you. So, back like Oracle, Informatic, and Business Objects were the really big players. I was really, getting people to understand that they could actually tie their ERP systems into something like a data warehouse and see data in a new way for the first time. Things like who was my most profitable customer, right? Big question that people are still asking today.
Mm-hmm.
And back then it was like, okay, can we tie, who are our biggest buyers with who returned product? So maybe they weren't our best buyers, right? What's the actual profitability? How many people continue to have a lifetime value there? So it was really, in early days, it was really focused on very specific asks and what could combine data glean that maybe you didn't know before, or maybe you had a validated hypothesis. And then as it's evolved, obviously it's gotten better. People are starting to look more not just on historical transactions, but they're also looking at the future or predictive analytics. How can we start taking what we know and building models for the future? There's also, data science. It's right. How do you take these volumes of data and try to discern something compelling out of that? So there's this growth in data, which isn't new to anyone who's been in the space. They know that data is growing. Everybody talks about data growing, but really it's how do you, I think the challenge now is with the advent of the cloud, and that's that ability to be able to kind of reduce costs, make things move incredibly fast, and pull in any type of data you can imagine. I think where we're headed now is this evolution of so what, right? Which is you've got all this data, in the cloud, and now you have the executives of these companies saying, okay, well, we've invested in this, or we're moving towards investing now, wherever they are in their journey. But the question comes back to, who is my most profitable customer? And how can I get products to market faster? And is all of this data that you've now put into the cloud, how are you showing me that? How are you proving the ROI? So I think what's most interesting is back in the early days of analytics, it was all about models and showing ROI and building these total cost of ownership models. And here we are, fast forward, asking ourselves the same question. Are we looking at the right data, right? Are we asking the right questions? Or is it really just a big giant thing that we're spending too much money on? So there's a lot of the conversations I hear now. It's almost like deja vu, but with a new technology platform.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I've heard similar aspects. We had Fern on. Obviously, those will be listening have already listened to her interview here, but I think she shared some similar insights there. So now that we kind of have an establishment of, some of the newer analytics that we're looking at as far as advanced analytics, modern analytics, can you maybe share some exciting use cases that you've seen with this kind of new thinking and new way of doing things?
Yeah, sure. I think, one of the most fascinating things that I see is everyone's now looking at things as an ecosystem. I think before I talked about you had a business objects reporting tool and you would use that, or you had an Oracle ERP system and you could use that. What really people are looking at now is the connectedness that we can all be, right? The connected enterprise, the connected world. And this really brings a lot of excitement because if you look at things like supply chain, right? We've all been talking about supply chain recently based on, not getting where's my box from Amazon? Why isn't it here? It's really that, I think that's the next level, is looking at that connectivity and saying, it's not just about one company looking at its own analytics, but it's really this ecosystem that we play in. And how do we connect vendors and suppliers? How do we connect applications, application integration with data integration? How do we take that next leap with process integration, right? Integrating things with processes, with data, with applications, and kind of looking at that bigger picture. That's really if you want to talk about a specific use case in supply chain, imagine, that someone orders something, it goes through this application system. It feeds the information to some type of analytics system that then looks at a store camera in an aisle and says, oh, wow, we're having a big run in this Australia store based on this people that are ordering it from Kansas. And we have to make sure that we're prepared for that. Now, that's obviously a very myopic example, but sure, that's really where we're headed, is really getting into that near real time forecasting and ability to make sure that in a supply chain example, for example, that you're always getting what you asked for from Amazon on the day that they said that they would get it, and there's no glitches, and that it's also self-learning and self-improving in that process. So that's really, some of the use cases. And then I'll add in even like I don't want to call it a nonprofit one, but like an education. Imagine teachers someday being able to, instead of teaching one curriculum, that they can find out through analytics that, this is more of a visual learner, or this is where this student is struggling, by looking at data in their own classrooms and making customized curriculum plans for their students that, I think a lot of people have said, oh, everything's changing so quickly and this is scary. And I look at it and say, think about the benefits. Think about how you could build a customized plan per child that gives them even a more chance for success, So that's kind of some of the use cases that I look at for analytics in the future and how I think it can make a lot of improvements.
Well, that's super cool. Honestly, I haven't heard that education path one before, but that makes a lot of sense. And hopefully something like that can be utilized in classrooms around the United States, especially, but around the world as well. That would be awesome. I was more of a visual learner myself, so I would be like, sign me up for that. That sounds very interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So keep going. Sorry, did you have something to say?
Oh, no, I was going to say that the type of learner I am is I like to hear it, and then I have to write it down. I don't necessarily have to go back and read my notes later, but my learning path is auditory to pen and paper. Yeah, so I agree. Everybody learns differently. So if we can figure out how to use some of these tools to improve individuals in the way that they learn, that kind of raises the bar for all of us, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I want to move into, some of these challenges. You listed some use cases there, and the ways that companies and organizations are starting to think about modern analytics. So what happens when companies try to start this initiative or try to start utilizing modern analytics? What challenges are they facing?
I've kind of said what's old is new again, right? And looking back at history, and even in the early days of data warehousing, we always talked about people, process, and technology, the three, main areas. And when you look at challenges, I don't think technology is necessarily the challenge. I think it's more about change management. right? It's more about the people and the process, because we're creatures of habit. We get up and we do certain things in a certain way. We prefer certain applications, Zoom versus Teams versus Slack versus whatever. And, people will fight to the bitter end to keep, their tool of choice.
Right.
And really the biggest challenge and obstacle, and I've also heard this from a lot of the GSIs that we work with, is the solution that they deploy. That's the easy part. Even though it's very difficult, that's almost the easy part. It's getting people to change the way that they do things, adopt new processes, so that they can take advantage of these opportunities, these new analytics, these new modern tech stacks. So it really does come back to the people and the process part, and change management being incredibly difficult, because you're talking about humans, right? You're talking about machines. You're not talking about artificial intelligence. You're not talking about, language models. You're talking about people. And every single one of us is unique and different. So I think that's the biggest challenge, is getting us all to adopt the same new analytic platform, or the path forward. That's definitely a big challenge.
Yeah, I think we've had a lot of conversations around culture, and I think that kind of fits well within that framework. Is like, if your organization is creating a culture that is data driven, it starts from the top down. I think it can become a little bit easier, but change management is always going to be a problem, I think, in this industry, with the constant having to refresh on what's new, and be able to communicate that throughout the rest of the organization. Data literacy, obviously, an issue there as well. So I'm right there with you.
You make a great point, and that's something that I didn't state, but I'll wholeheartedly agree with you. It is a top-down decision to become data-driven, and until the key leaders of an organization make that decision, they decide to truly embrace, a cloud-first path across the products they develop, across the way they go to market, across the way that the sellers sell, and really embrace that entire model and hold people accountable, and not let them do things in an old way, but really say, no, this is the path forward. I think you make a great point as well. You've got to be data driven from the top down. It's not going to happen in pockets at an organization. Yeah.
Okay, so final question for you. I know you're busy, and I want to let you have the rest of your day back. But what would be some recommendations or best practices that you've seen organizations implement when it comes to modern analytics? We talked a little bit about some of the things that you can overcome challenges with, but maybe you can drill a little bit deeper there for us.
Number one, don't go it alone. Don't go it alone. And what I mean by that is, I talked about the ecosystem that we're in, right? You will not find one tool, one software, one person that's going to make this successful. It's really important to lean in on, if you have a key advisory, a systems integration advisory that can help you walk the path to determine what is your overall goal. Is it data monetization? Is it improved customer experience? Is it, you really have to know what those are, and then really get someone who's been there, done that, walked the path. The second piece is lean into your cloud partner, whoever that may be. Most individuals would be surprised at how much, if they have a MAC commitment or an EDP, a cloud consumption commitment with a vendor, the levels of support they can get, making sure that people are certified, that they are ready to take on the new challenges of tomorrow, that they're continuously enabling themselves on what's going on out there, and working with the cloud partners as well as how can they help. There's so many available assets out there for help. Is our architecture set up right? Can you validate this, right? There's so many individuals out there willing to help, and companies willing to help. And that's my advice, is use a strategic partner, lean into your cloud partner if you have one, and just don't go it alone, and don't try to build it by yourself, because we're in this connected enterprise, this connected world. You can't be connected if you're, living in a silo.
Very well put. And we see that more and more organizations are using that partnership to provide their customer base with as many outlets as possible for whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. So it makes a lot of sense that organizations look to those partners that they can use. Well, Teresa, I really appreciate your time. I am going to let you go at this point. It was a pleasure talking with you today, and hopefully we'll have you on the podcast again shortly. But hope you have a good rest of your day, and thanks again for taking the time.
Thank you, Andrew. This has been great. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today.
Absolutely. Take care.